What's up, Internet? My name is Matt, or to many people that haven't actually known my real name, I've often been referred to over time as the loud guy up front. It's something that goes into my past a little bit, but I kind of like it, so I'm going to take it and roll with it. Anyway, I'm a big fan of media, and when I say media, I mean TV, music, movies, video games, and even the occasional book or two. I also really like doing reviews of things, so with the powers combined of my love of media and a platform like YouTube to share insights and reviews of things, I'm going to take a stab at doing my own takes and videos on all things media. Whether it's widely known things that I'm eager to weigh in on, or lesser known gems that I think the world needs to know about, I'm taking to YouTube to share my thoughts on what I love or hate about all the bits of media that we all consume. So hopefully by watching you can learn a thing or two along the way, or even just be entertained by it all. Also, P.S. this is the remastered version of my first ever video because the first version sucked and I like this one a lot better. So anyway, with all that said, let's dive into the rest of the remastered version of my very first review with a trip back to the heart of the 8-bit gaming era. The Legend of Zelda. Before diving all the way into the review of its sequel, let's get a little bit nostalgic about the original. This NES classic launched one of gaming's biggest franchises that is still running strong today. Tons of things about this game were revolutionary in the era it debuted, and it's gone on to do plenty more revolutionizing over the years. If there is a console released by Nintendo, you can count on a Zelda game being one of the most memorable titles to grace that console. With maybe one exception. I can't find it. Still, whether you're immersed in the experience of top-down 2D worlds of the early years, or the massive 3D environments that have been blowing our minds since the Ocarina of Time, The Legend of Zelda has produced a handful of great games, a couple of which many people would describe as masterpieces. But among the more than 20 releases in the series, there's one game that, no matter how you spin it, sticks out from the rest. For how much fun the original Legend of Zelda was, it's easy to imagine just how high expectations were for its sequel. But instead of treading some more on the ground they broke with the first Zelda game, Nintendo went pretty much an entirely different route with things with Zelda 2. From the beginning, we can already see that we are in for a change. Instead of being able to move any direction, it's down to just left or right. Plus, we see that the ability to jump is now in Link's repertoire. It appears much more like a Super Mario Bros. Game than what people might have expected from a Zelda game. Really, the only familiarity we have from the first game is the ability to shoot a beam out of Link's sword. And even that is a shell of what it was. Seriously, look at that thing. It's tiny, it sucks, doesn't even do damage, except for the weakest enemies in the game. Anyway, then we see a little familiarity with the overworld view, which goes right out the window once a battle comes. In other words, almost all the mechanics of gameplay from the first game are gone, and this is exactly why I think so many people were quick to abandon this game. The first one created massive expectations which were almost entirely unmet when gamers popped in the sequel for the first time. And since first impressions are often the most vivid, Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link has carried the reputation of being a bad game, which I just don't entirely agree with. Now, don't get me wrong, Zelda 2 is without question the black sheep of the series. But when you separate yourself from the expectations of what could have been, it's really a pretty good game. Anyway, this intro has been insanely long enough as is, so let's break down the various aspects of Zelda 2. The story to Zelda 2 goes a little something like this. After Ganon was destroyed, Impa told Link his sleeping spell was cast on Princess Zelda. She will wake only with the power of number 3 Triforce sealed in a palace in Hyrule. To break the seal, crystals must be placed in statues in 6 well-guarded palaces. Link set out on his most adventuresome quest yet. 1987 Nintendo. I have a few problems here. First, we literally saw Ganon reduced to a pile of dust. Then we rescued Zelda, and all was well, right? That should be the end of it with that bad guy. Unless Ganon had some time delay on his sleeping spell, it's tough to imagine how he pulled that one off. Unless... Second, I don't like that they went right back to the damsel in distress motive for the game. Why not tell us that maybe Ganon could still be revived through this third piece of the Triforce, and that Link must journey to the Great Palace in order to finish the job in saving Hyrule? And how about integrating Princess Zelda into helping Link throughout his adventure? We spend the entire first game saving her. It's kind of agitating to have to go right back to saving her. In other words, you saved the princess in the first game. Now save the world in the second one by preventing Ganon from being revived. I just can't help but think that they could have at least put in a tad bit more thought on this intro. But whatever, that was kind of the thing back in those days, so let's just get into the gameplay. Like Like I said before, this game is completely different from the original, and so much of what people dislike about it is that they were hoping on a sequel true to the game they fell in love with. Instead, it wasn't that. But separate expectations from this experience, and it's really a pretty fun game. The overall experience and growth of Link throughout this game is done this time through new skills and magic spells, rather than just the items you gather and collect throughout your journey. And on top of that, you really have to learn how to take on different enemies throughout the game to survive. Different enemies will attack you differently, as well as defend your attacks in different ways, and even as you get stronger and learn things like the up and down stabs, there's still a right and wrong way to approach different enemies. And later in the game, knowing how to battle all of them can be crucial, as every bit of health will be badly needed. Not to mention that there will probably be a time or two when you'll find yourself grinding for experience for short amounts of time in order to reach that next level up. And if you don't know how to combat these enemies and die, then that experience gets wiped clean upon a game over. For as hard as this game gets though, and it really does get very hard with all the things thrown at you, the difficulty curve grows very appropriately, so that you'll rarely feel overwhelmed and helpless. With maybe the exception of Death Mountain. Because Death Mountain, well, it's kind of bullshit. There's also a few other fun bits about this game when you have to think a little creatively or take leaps of faith to solve certain puzzles to advance. After all, what's a Zelda game without some puzzle solving, right? And if you recognize the little oddities like a dead-end wall in a town or long-spanning pits with no lava at the bottom, you can find your way just by noticing that those things are inconsistent with everything else thus far in the game. And when it comes to a game where you might be stuck by puzzles or you get the crazy idea to try something bold to solve it, and that thing you tried actually works, it feels pretty rewarding. Compared to the original, I think it makes a pretty decent improvement in the puzzle-solving department, going above and beyond simply pushing blocks and bombing walls. I mentioned earlier that this game is the definitive black sheep of the Zelda series, so there's a lot that sets it apart from other Zelda titles. The biggest thing though is the difficulty. This game is pretty hard. I doubt many people would argue against it being the hardest of the series. But for as hard as the game is, it never really feels cheaply difficult, which is a tough balance to get for a difficult game. Sure, you've got a few enemies who are pains in the ass, but once you've learned how they come at you and when they'll respawn, you can be cautious enough to avoid danger for the most part. Overall, the differences in this game from the rest of the series are what give it a bad reputation. I think that if this game had been made as its own standalone title, rather than a much anticipated sequel to one of the all-time classics, it would probably have been much more highly regarded in people's minds. But, at the same time, having the Zelda name attached to it is likely the main reason many people ever gave it a try in the first place. Trying to find unique aspects about this game compared to other NES games outside the Zelda series makes this look much more appealing. It's a lengthy adventure where you earn experience points to level up your character, learn new attacks, gain new magic spells, and have plenty of areas to explore and items to find. When you look at it like that, the game looks pretty dang alright. Visuals and audio might be the area where this game lacks the most. There isn't much music in the whole game, and for what there is, it's all pretty average. The overall theme is just okay, the town music is pretty basic, the random battles and cave music is alright but gets old real quick, and the boss music is really boring. The only music that I think is even decently memorable from this game is the palace music, but even then, doesn't do a ton for me. Mediocre as the audio is, the game lacks even more visually. Outside of the human characters and enemies in this game, everything is square. In the first Zelda, you had a lot of diverse textures and colors that made areas feel unique. Some things were smooth, some were jagged, but no matter what it was, it looked good. Even the overly bland screens of the desert area of the original Hyrule map are able to convey the barren desolation of a desert because of how smooth and defined the rest of the map is. It's not the case in Zelda 2. Here, practically everything is just square. The overworld is square, the houses are square, the side-scrolling environments are square, the patches of grass and trees are square, even the edges of the freaking ocean are square! When it all comes down to it, I feel like the audio and visuals of this game are lacking anything really good, and not just in comparison to the original Legend of Zelda either. It just doesn't look that good on its own. Now I will admit, when I was younger, I was in the camp of disliking this game. I'd always put it in expecting to play a Zelda game like the original one I loved so much, but that experience was never what I expected, and at that age, the elements I eventually liked about this game didn't really make sense to me as a kid. And to make matters worse, the difficulty of this game isn't exactly kid-friendly. As I got a little older though, like around the ages of 10 or 11, and gave this game more of a chance, it really started to grow on me. Making actual progress in a game that was this difficult was pretty validating for a young kid. It certainly doesn't hold the same excitement for me as the original, but really, few things in this world ever could. Beating this game is a hell of a task, and when you begin that battle with Dark Link for the first time after you've beaten the Great Palace, it's pretty exciting, even though you're not really sure why your shadow has jumped out and started attacking you. Just the fact that after all those palaces you've beaten, and to have finally beaten the sprawling maze that is the Great Palace, knowing how close you are to the end is a thrill. That thrill quickly turns into helplessness though, as you realize just how insanely hard Dark Link is, even compared to the difficulty of the rest of the game. Like I said before, the best way to enjoy this game is by suspending any expectations of it being like other Zelda games. To have taken this sharp a turn with this being the second game in the series was a bold move on Nintendo's part, and really, probably not a great one. They more than made up for it with the next entry in the series, but it still leaves one to wonder what could have been. I've always felt that in a story-based game like this, where you can interact with people and your environment, they could have created a little bit more of a looming threat of what the Great Palace holds. Instead, we never really have any built-up disdain for the final boss, or really the Great Palace in general, and especially not the eventual battle with Dark Link. Those things are cool and all, and the game's a lot of fun, but they just don't make a ton of sense outside of just, hey, there's a bad guy, destroy them. I'd like to have some emotion attached to really wanting to beat these guys, and I think this game could have built that up, but it didn't. Nitpicking aside, I'm a firm believer that if you fully immerse yourself in this game, that you're going to enjoy it. It's a good NES game that progresses well, challenges the player in a handful of ways, stays fair despite its high difficulty, and rewarding all at the same time. It's the unmet expectations that were the bulk of the undoing in many people's eyes with this game. It's a quality experience that requires a lot of learning how to play, a lot of problem solving, and a decent bit of creative thinking to get you through it. Despite its black sheep status from the rest of the series, at least a little bit of the open world and exploration aspects that made the original Legend of Zelda a classic are still present in this game. The ways in which Zelda 2 strays from the rest of the series is partly what makes this game its own worst enemy, but also part of what makes it a more unique entry in the whole series as well. So with all that said, I give Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link a 7 out of 10. So that's it for the first video, the remastered version. You didn't want to see the original, it was bad. But if you have comments about this video or on the game, what you liked or didn't like about it, please hit up the comments section below. Also, if you like this video at all, please click the thumbs up button below. And if you want more videos and more reviews on TV, music, movies, and video games, and maybe even a book one day, please click subscribe. But above all else, everybody, thank you so much for watching. Hey everybody, thank you again for watching this remastered version of my very first review. If you never saw the original, please believe me when I tell you that it was a train wreck, and this version is much, much better. Also be sure to check out a couple of my other videos that I have linked in the annotations below, and also click the annotation at the top of the screen to subscribe.